Sup nerds, if you have watched my previous handheld video on the Retro Mini, then you might have seen the part where I say that I will make a video on the RS-97, which is this guy. So, we have it here. Let's talk about this. Now, I bought this back in 2017. It was probably the last thing that I bought for myself before quitting my job in 2019. And so as far as emulation handhelds go, this was my last contact to that. But back then, this was the king of the Linux-based emulation handhelds. Of course, around 2017 was when the very first GPD Win came out, and that made emulation in handhelds progress a ton because it was running Windows, of course. But near that time was also when Android-based handhelds started to get popular, and so of course those did perform better than this. But in terms of Linux-based handhelds and the price of the handhelds, the RS-97 was king. Now this one does have an interesting history, because before this was a thing, this exact same carcass was being used on a different handheld being sold for a much different purpose. That one that came before used to be white. It did have this transparent one color too, but it used to have the word Revo K101. And the Revo K101 did make a huge name for itself way back then, and that one was not exactly an emulation handheld, but a clone of the Game Boy Advance. That's right, in this exact same body, it used to play original Game Boy Advance cartridges. So much so that in this RS-97, which is no longer the Revo K101, and this one is currently a full-fledged emulation handheld, it did still keep the Game Boy Advance cartridge slot with this, which at this moment in time for this handheld is not a flash card, but back then for the Revo K101 it used to have all of the innards of a full-fledged flash card, and so it could play the original Game Boy Advance cartridges and it had the flash card to play other stuff. So that was a fantastic handheld back then, which was quickly taken down. Now, if it was actually Nintendo that took it down, or if it was something else that happened to it, it was up for sale for just a few months and then it completely disappeared. I myself had been eyeing one of those when it was making its rounds. I did want to buy one, but I wasn't too sure about it. And then when I did decide to make a purchase, it was no longer being sold anywhere, which was pretty sad. But then like 8 months later or so, around end of 2017, early 2018, we started to see these come out. Exact same body and buttons of the Revo K101 without the branding of the Revo K101. A lot of people back then, when they saw this, they thought it was the Revo K101 coming back and did buy it, only to realize that it was no longer a GBA clone, but a RS-97 retro game, which was now a emulation handheld. Like the ones we saw before, like the Retro Mini and Dingu and stuff like that. The form factor was much like a Dingu. So as you can see, it is fairly bigger than the Dingu A320. That said, the screen size, it feels quite similar, maybe slightly bigger, just a smidgen bigger, but definitely a bigger screen size than the RS-90, the Retro Mini. The D-pad on it was slightly flimsy, but you could definitely feel the ball on the middle. It wasn't like the Dingu where it just smushed in, so that was pretty nice. You could do the diagonals a lot better. It was a better D-pad, but it was thinner and smaller, so that didn't feel that great, but you know, it served its purpose. There was a select and start. Down here, the A, B, X, Y buttons. You can see there was one speaker down here. The LED lights of power and charging. Here it did have the volume dial, which is always fantastic to have. Back here there is the exact same battery that I showed you from the Retro Mini. On this one it is not bloated yet. I've been using it okay so far, so that's fantastic. Although I did buy them just a little over a year apart way back then. Here is a power button. It is a click and hold power button. It's not too great. Back then I did used to press accidentally when I clicked it, so it used to be on inside my bag or my pocket, so not a great design here. It did protrude out a little bit as well, so easily presses, so it's not that great. Up here it does have the mini USB, which is a downgrade from the micro USB on its little brother, and this button here, central button, with the Revo K101, it used to be the brightness button. On here, I'm not sure if it was the menu button or if it was still the brightness button. There is AV out here, and there is this extension 1 here, which on this device serves no purpose, but like I said, this carcass was from the Revo K101, which was a Game Boy Advance clone. And as you can see on the official Game Boy Advance, it does have the same thing, which is the link cable. So this was a link cable for the other Game Boy Advances. Of course, on this particular device, it serves no purpose, but for the Revo K101, because it was a perfect clone, you could link cable with other Game Boy Advances and still play together, which was fantastic. I really wish I had my hands on one of the Revo K101 back then, but I don't. Now, it is important to note that as the time of the recording of this, a revised version of the Revo K101 is being sold at Embernick. They definitely didn't have those colors back then, so I assume it is a revised version. Maybe trying to get rid of the specific carcasses that they had left. But right now in 2025, after all this time, at that price range, I'm not sure that this is worth it anymore. The LNR buttons were actually shoulder buttons. As you can see, it does cover the side. It's not like the Dingo A320, which was just like little tabs that you clicked. They were mushy and not clicky, but if you see, they were weird and flimsy. Because this is see-through, you can see that it is just one slim button on the middle here. So if you pressed too much on this side or on that side, it wouldn't actually click. It would fold the button under there instead of click. So that was a little awkward. You did have to press like right down the middle. That was something that people didn't enjoy too much, but you know, like I always say, it did serve its purpose for back then. And down here, of course, there is a reset button, something we didn't see in the RS-90, but something that we definitely did see with the Dingo devices. And then the headphone jack here, of course, fantastic. And you know, a little spot here for lanyards. And I do love this. I don't know why a lot of the handhelds nowadays don't have that anymore. I did used to love putting little charms on my handheld devices. It did make them feel personalized. The build was okay. I have heard back then from people who had the Revo K101 that with the Revo K101 it did feel a lot more premium. It didn't have as many shaking parts. With this, I don't know if you can hear, but it does have a lot of shaky parts. Overall build quality is great, just the buttons, they do feel a little flimsy. And of course the battery that they use is not that great, even though on this particular one I haven't had problems with it. And of course, like I said, this cartridge on this device only serves as a micro SD reader. I assume they still had a bunch of these carcasses lying around and they didn't want to spend money modifying them because they already had a bunch. So they just repurposed it, putting it in, and that's why we have the link cable extension and this removable slot, but it is just a micro SD slot. And yeah, I will put the specs of it here. It does also still use a Ingenic chip. That said, it is a slightly different chip. It ends in 6.0 instead of the 3.2 or the 2.5. And I'm not sure if that actually changes much, but this was, if I remember correctly, one of the very first handheld emulations back then that came out with 128 megabytes of RAM, which is 4 times as much RAM as these two things and twice as much as the Dingo A330. So that was fantastic, and that is what made this the king of emulation handheld back then. Of course, like I always mention, we did still have the modded PSP around, which did run things better. It did run PS1 natively. It did run PSP natively, of course. And of course, this is something that couldn't run PSP. People who had the PSP or people who actually made their own Raspberry Pi handheld usually had a better handheld. That said, for a mass-produced out-of-the-box handheld, this was the king, and at the time this was like $50 around there, so it was a lot cheaper than you trying to buy a PSP or to make your own Raspberry Pi handheld. So yeah, cost wise this was much better, and out of all of the emulation handhelds, this performed the best. Now, out of the box it didn't have PlayStation 1 emulator, and just mentioning, the screen is definitely a lot better than any of the other ones that came before. That said, I'm not sure what is up with this menu. I don't know if it was meant for a different device and they just smushed it in here, but a lot of the things do look squished, like the battery on there does look squished. The icons look okay. If you go to the settings, you can see that a lot of it does look very squished. Language settings, background settings, sound settings, backlight time, backlight settings. It is at 3. It is very bright and clean, as you can see. Restore default settings, system info. This one actually has system info, which is fantastic. But it does say model LN430, which I don't know what that means. And it does cut off part of the information here. Version 3.12, I think, but I'm not too sure. And of course, as you can see, it does have internal disk of 4 gigabytes. I didn't put any micro SD on here yet, but I do plan on putting a custom firmware with you guys in this video. And here, the reader, it's not just text reader. It did have PDF, RTF, doc, and HTML, which is fantastic. Like, this was the first one that could read all that and not just the text. So, you know, you can see progress, and not just in gaming, but in the emulation handheld applications in general. Pictures. I was scared there for a second that it was something inappropriate, but you know, just those screenshots that they had on this for them to take a picture for the online listings, I guess. You can see that there is a light back here, and we can see it because this is a transparent carcass, something that if you are playing in the dark, you do notice a lot more. Green light, don't want to know, Starboy, and then games. And these, of course, this is currently on the stock OS out of the box. You could play CPS, Neo Geo, Game Boy Advance, Super Famicom, which is Super Nintendo, Mega Drive, Famicom, which is Nintendo, Nintendo 8-bits, Game Boy Color, SMS, Sega Master System, I believe, Game Gear, Game Boy, and yeah, that is it. It is definitely a lot more emulators than on the Dingo A320 stock OS, but of course, people back then wondered why with a 128 megabytes they didn't have more on there, which is why, of course, the community decided to make custom firmwares for it. It's just that I didn't bother with it on mine because, again, I did have a modded PSP for all the PS1 and PSP stuff. But yeah, let's see what games we have in here. Okay, so I don't know if I deleted, but there's no Super Famicom games. There's no Mega Drive games. Now that is kind of weird. Yeah, maybe I deleted everything. I can only see the Game Boy stuff. Let's go to File Manager, maybe. Yeah, I mean, obviously you can see that there used to be other games on here because it does have the save file of Wario Land, and you can see the numbering is the numbers of the ROMs that were in here. But I'm not sure what happened to all my ROMs. I will put some ROMs in it and then come back real quick. Okay, so what's a video without some complications, right? I think something somewhere got corrupted because I was not able to add things. If you see here and go to GBA, there are the 2 ROMs that are still there, but pressing A on them doesn't do anything. It doesn't open them. Pressing start doesn't do anything. I don't. So something is obviously wrong, aside from the fact that all the ROMs are gone as well. So I did try to go to File Manager and open the micro SD card. I did put some ROMs on there, but going in there, it doesn't recognize most of the ROMs. If you see here, it's seeing a save file on there, but not the ROMs. And I did put a lot of ROMs in there. It doesn't see anything on the Game Boy Color one, Super Nintendo. You can see that symbol over there, that is the game and that is the save file. So it does see a few games, but again, pressing A shows the option to open and it just does not open. It's almost as if not only did the ROM files get deleted, but also the emulator files got deleted. So it's trying to open, but it doesn't know what to open with. So that is a little awkward. Clicked on restore default settings. Maybe this is what it did. I don't know. And maybe that deleted everything in here. I don't know. Oh? Wait, the games are back? The games are back. I don't. What in the world? I don't. Okay, it's kind of confusing. I don't. But hey, at least that worked. So yeah, let's try to play a game. Okay, so it is opening. Oh, I am so, you have no idea the relief I'm feeling right now. I thought maybe the internal drive was corrupted and shot, perhaps. But hey, there you go. We can play these things now, at least with the stock OS. Anyway, so yeah. Obviously, this will be able to play Game Boy Advance almost perfectly, I think, if not perfectly. Yeah, and this was a bad choice, I guess. Let's quit, and you can see that there is the menu over there. There's Pokemon, and this is all from the internal memory, right? So you can see that, let's see, 196 GBA games, which is pretty good, I guess. CPS has 33 games, Neo Geo has 83 games, Super Nintendo has 55, Mega Drive has 142, 146 Nintendo, 52 Game Boy Color, Master System 8, 40 on Game Gear, 62 on Game Boy. Okay, so that is a decent amount of games that would come with this without any of the micro SD. Since this does use Ingenic and 128 megabytes of RAM, the performance of all the games will be equal to or better than everything on the A330 and the A320. So GBA probably works almost up to 100%. We could try to see if they have any of the games that we tried with the other devices to maybe compare. Rockman X, they do, but not Megaman 3, I guess. They don't have Starfox either. This is a bit of a random selection of games. I mean, I guess we could try Rockman for us to see if it is as smooth as it is on A330, because on A330 we did show that it ran off of a Pocket SNES emulator. I presume it won't be any worse. Better. So I don't know if you guys noticed, but it's definitely not as smooth as it is in A330. There is a slight frame rate drop, which is unfortunate and weird, because this is a much more powerful device than A320 and A330. Yeah, there was a lot of frame rate drop on that fall over there. This is like I'm running the game on the A320. Not as bad, of course, it wasn't as choppy, but when we ran the game on the A320 Dingux, on the custom firmware, it did have slight frame rate drops when the bridge dropped and stuff like that, and that's what it feels like here. Movement wise, you can see that it is very smooth. It's just that once we get to the enemy, right there. Yeah, it's definitely a little choppy and weird. Not too sure how to feel about that. Yeah, every time there's a lot of movement in there, it does have some frame rate issues. Let's see if it can read our SD card now. Yes, it can. You can see all my games now. So I don't know what was wrong with it. So we can try the games here that we wanted to try, like Starfox. Now Starfox did have an issue even on, yeah, so right off the bat you can see that it is having issues. But it was having issues even on the A330. So on A330 I guess it didn't even boot, but you can see that it is going pretty slow. Yeah, this is not good at all. This is unplayable. Although I do think it is better than A320, but of course it should because it does have 4 times the RAM. But I think maybe the emulator that he's using is not a good one. So yeah, that is terrible. That is terrible. Let's see Megaman 3 to see if it even shows up. Just like on A320, Megaman 3 did not work. Like a lot of the sprites weren't even showing. So let's try that here to see if it's any different. Yeah, so it's at least showing on this one. So it is at least better than the A320, which is to be expected, I guess. But as we saw, there were some frame rate issues with the first Megaman X. Yeah, so there is a lot of frame rate drops over there too. I'm pretty sure this is an emulator issue. Yeah, so this is an emulator issue, I think, which once we put custom firmware on should fix that, but it's a little sad to see. So stock OS, you can still have fun. It's just that Super Nintendo is a console that people had issue emulating. So what we can do is now try to put the custom firmware on this and then try again and see if it changes anything. I assume it will, because I've seen videos of RS-97 running PlayStation 1 games fairly well. So we'll do that. Let's put the custom firmware on this and then test it out. Okay, so first things first, we do have to remove the plate with the screwdriver, remove the battery, and over there you will see that it says Retro Game V2.0. That V2.0, that is the version we will need. Now apparently the one that has had most updates is this retro firmware. The latest version of it is from 2022, which really is not that long ago. January 2022, so you know, it has been updated for quite a long time, which is fantastic. But this one does require me to open up my RS-97 to get to the internal micro SD. I guess I could do that eventually, but for convenience sake, I do assume that most people won't want to do that. So let's try to put a firmware that doesn't require opening up the console. And one of them is from this Retro Arcade 97 here. Okay, so I will leave the links to everything I use on the description down below. But these are pretty easy to find because the RS-97, like I mentioned before, was very popular during its time, especially because it was one of the very first handhelds that for an entry-level price, you could put firmwares and run even up to some of the PS1 games, which back then was really impressive. So all of these custom firmwares and stuff are pretty well documented. They are out there and easy to find, you just have to Google it. But if you don't want to Google it, the links that I use will be on the description down below. So first you want to get this RS-97 external loader. You can come down here and they will have on assets, external loader. And of course you just have to put in your micro SD onto the computer, extract the external loader right there, and then put it into your RS-97. And then turn on your RS-97, go to File Manager. Kind of tough doing this with one hand. And you do want to look for what you put in there, the SD card, external loader, and you want to run the install DGE. Press A to continue. Success. So now you just go back, turn this off again. And then you take out the micro SD, put it back into the computer, and then put in your bootable image. Yeah, so for the image that we'll be using is of course the Dingux 1.3, this one. The new RS-97 V21 and RS-97 V21, I assume that means the version of the RS-97. If you look in the back behind the battery, the one in this picture is V21, so they would have to download the V21 version. Mine is just 2.0, so I will be downloading just that normal one and trying. This, I think, is the original firmware. I don't know, but we'll be trying the open degugs. That will be fun to see because our A320 of course has open degugs in it, and that was the reason why a lot of people like the RS-97, because the RS-97 let us pick up from where the A320 left off. So download it and extract the image to have the open degugs here, and then go to Rufus and select the image, open degugs to write, and then just start. And then just write the image into the micro SD. It might take a while, and then once that is done, you plug it back into the RS-97 and it should boot into the custom firmware. Okay, so moment of truth. We put it finished writing, we put it into the device, and now we'll turn it on. Haha, there you go, open degugs for RS-97. And there you go. It did boot into the open degugs. Now, as I mentioned before, we did put it here on the external SD. The internal SD, it's somewhere around there behind this. You do have to open the whole panel to get to it. And a lot of people do prefer that way because they will just never use the stock firmware. But the way we did it with the external, if we take this out and boot it up without the micro SD, then it will boot into the stock firmware. Those are the ports, I believe. And the emulators, GPSP, fantastic. You can see that the emulators on this are newer than the emulators on the open degugs of the A320. They have Oh Boy, Pico Drive, PCSX for all. There you go. That is a PlayStation emulator, and that is what we're dying to try. We know for a fact that GB and stuff like that will run fine on here. All this older stuff will run pretty good, but PlayStation 1, of course, it won't be perfect, but this was the only cheaper alternative. Like I mentioned, the RS-97 at the time when it first came out, it was $50 US, which nowadays a lot of the entry handhelds from Ambernic are also around that price range, and those can do PS1 fine just out of the box. But back then, this being $50, and having the possibility to do all this was a fantastic prospect, especially because the Dingu A320, when it first came out, it was around $100, if I remember correctly. So in comparison to that, it was a fairly substantial upgrade at half the price. So you can see why this was very popular. Anyway, I'll go add some ROMs to this and then we'll go test this out. Now, of course, one thing we do have to do is use a partition wizard tool, kind of like the mini tool free version that I'm using here, because a lot of the space that we did use during the imaging did get lost. And so all we need to do is find the disk, of course, which is this one, click on the ROM partition and then extend. And then you will ask how much you want to extend. And of course, we do want all of the shebang so that we can put the ROMs in it. Just click apply. And it will be very quick. Applied all pending changes, and there you go. That is done. If we go back here and then go to ROMs, property, and there you go. We do have that much more space back. And so let's put on the ROMs and then try this thing out. Okay, so we'll try Megaman X3. Sound at least is pretty good, looks very smooth. I think that's frames per second over there. Looks very smooth. Yeah, so I mean, it's not getting 60 frames per second, but it definitely did play quite well. Much better than the Dingo A320 and the Dingo A330. So yeah, this is it's uncomparable. Very nice, very nice. Yeah, sounds good. The sound is pretty good. The movement is really good. Even though it says 40 out of 60, it's been pretty smooth. A lot smoother than I thought it was gonna be. There was a little pause before and after the boss fight, but that might have been part of the script. I'm not too sure. But yeah, so Super Nintendo running pretty great. Another game that we were having a lot of hard time with on the others was Starfox, of course. That is one of the notoriously harder to emulate games on the Super Nintendo. So we'll try it here and see if that is okay. And just right off the bat, it is a lot smoother animation. On the A320, it was barely moving. On the A330, we couldn't even get it to boot because of the emulator difference. But yeah, this is worlds better. It's so much smoother. It says 20 frames per second at that moment there, but let's see. Oh my goodness, this is so much smoother. I mean, of course, this is also not 100%, obviously, but it's definitely playable. It's way smoother. On the A320, it was unplayable, but this is not bad at all. Which one was boost again? Oh, X. Yeah, so this is definitely playable, not 100% though, of course. Up until this point, 2017, I mean, I guess the Open Dingus was 2018, but up to this point, at least the emulators that they had on this Open Dingus and these other custom firmwares, they weren't good enough to do 100% Super Nintendo, which is interesting to think about, especially because on the computer, Super Nintendo emulation was pretty spot on for a really long time, even like way early on. I remember even back very early 2000s, we had Super Nintendo emulators that even ran on DOS that were pretty good, and then the SNES 9X that we got for the Windows as well. You know, most of them ran really well. I never remember having any issues with Yoshi Island and Star Fox on the computer. But of course, these handhelds, hardware-wise, were very weak in comparison, so I guess it kind of makes sense, but still, which is interesting because this still used Ingenic chip, which was very outdated even back then. Even back when this was new, it was very outdated, especially because the Dingo A320 on 2009 was using similar chipsets. So it's not too surprising that he had similar issues, but of course, with a 128 megabyte RAM, of course, it did run things better than the A320. Not only was it cheaper than the alternatives, definitely cheaper than getting a PSP to mod it to emulate, and definitely cheaper and less effort than getting a Raspberry Pi to make your own handheld out of it, which is what many people ended up doing to be able to get the performance that they wanted. But for those of us that didn't want to spend too much money or effort, this was the thing to do. I do realize that a lot of the modern handhelds nowadays that are entry level are on that price range as well, but they of course perform much better than this one. Now let's check out the PlayStation 1 games, because that is something that the A320 was practically unable to do and the A330 without firmware couldn't do, but with firmware I've seen some people run it somewhat okay, but of course not very well either. And so let's see if with this we can run some stuff. We'll try Megaman X4 just because we have been trying all the other Megamans anyway, so why not? And right off the bat, that looks pretty smooth, but of course that is just the intro, so let's see in game. You can see that it does say almost 60 frames per second, and that does look very promisingly smooth. I mean, it is Mega Man, so it doesn't take too much to emulate it, I guess.
Interest to stop them now before they turn on you. You possess enough power to destroy them.
So sound-wise, that was pretty good. No sound bugs there. Animation also looked okay. Oh. And that looks pretty smooth, guys. Yeah, so I got carried away playing, but yeah, this is definitely playable, very cool. But like I said, Mega Man X4. As far as PlayStation games go, Mega Man X4 was not very heavy at all. It was one of the easier ones to emulate. So we'll have to test out the other games, but it is cool to see it running PlayStation 1 games. Yeah, so you holding select and then start opens up the emulator menu. You can see that there was like GPU settings and whatnot, so I assume you can tweak it to make it run slightly better. Let's go Final Fantasy Tactics. And like Final Fantasy Tactics, it is a turn-based game and all, but it did have a lot going on, especially during the cutscenes, like when the map would like turn and stuff, when they would change angles and stuff. So it will be good to test that. It did usually take a bit of power to emulate Final Fantasy Tactics. I mean, it's maintaining 60 FPS, but that is like pre-rendered cutscene, I guess. So that we'll have to see once they start talking and stuff. Yeah, you can see that the FPS did drop down quite a bit significantly. And there's some graphical glitch right there. I don't know what that is. 29 frames per second, that is not promising. .30 FPS. I mean, it is playable, I guess, but you can definitely tell that it is slower than it is supposed to be. He talked a lot fast. Oh, 50, yeah. So once the map turned, he went from 30 to 50. So maybe it was just that angle that didn't work out well. I don't know. But now it's definitely going a lot faster. She's talking fast too. I don't. Yeah, so it's probably this is the default angle, and then the other was forced angle or something. I don't know. It went back to 30. It turned a little, yeah, I think so. That previous angle was the standardized angle, the default one. Yeah, once the gameplay started, it went back to 50 frames per second. So yeah, that is definitely playable. It is just the cutscenes that will be slightly slower, depending on the angle, I guess. Yeah, it goes back to 30 when there's speech. I don't know why. Oof, the frames dropped down quite a bit for the skill. And that's one of the cooler skills too. Yeah, so it varies. That skill was definitely quite a bit faster. I don't know why it slows down and speeds up. What's different about them, but it's definitely playable. But it's like compared to handhelds nowadays, it's just a little uncomfortable. But yeah, back then you were looking at the best performance in an emulation handheld back in 2017. This was peak. I did beat Final Fantasy Tactics also on a handheld, but it was on the PSP. So, and that one was the PSP version, so of course it ran perfectly without any issues. So kind of can't compare, I guess. So again, like I said, this is definitely playable. If this is all you had, then I don't see it being a problem. But like I said, now in 2025, we do have a lot better options, and they're not that expensive either. Any of the Miiu handhelds can run PS1 fairly well right out of the box, so those are probably better options today. But if, like me, this is the newest thing that you have, then, you know, as you can see, it's no problem. It's definitely playable, definitely enjoyable. Let's try Crash Team Racing. Sounds okay. 60 frames per second. Oh, the sound stopped. Did he freeze? I think it froze. Yeah, I think it froze. So Crash Team Racing does not run apparently. Let's try Harvest Moon, which is also not too demanding, but also not demanding. Yeah, so it is at 49, but again, whenever I see dialogue in games, the frames do drop a little bit. So it could, yeah, you can see that it is talking slower. So it could be that it will be better when we actually get to move the character around on our own. Okay, so it lets me move around. 50 frames per second is not too bad. Yeah, so I'm not too sure about this one. Like the frame rate is not too bad. 44 shouldn't be too, anything above 30 I usually feel like it is playable. but in this game in particular, it does feel choppy when I run. The movement seems fairly choppy, and I'm not sure why that feels like that, because it is 4550, which shouldn't be that bad. But yeah, it is what it is. Like, it doesn't, I don't know, it feels like there's a lot of frames being cut out. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely playable as well. Not the greatest experience, but definitely playable. We're gonna try driver, I guess, but I can't imagine it will run that great. Frames per second, 50. 50 is the maximum. I am getting pretty sleepy though. Checking memory card. Did it freeze? I think it froze. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it froze. The sound stopped and everything, so I'm pretty sure it froze. Yeah, so no driver either, which is understandable. I guess it is a heavier game. I'm guessing like anything that was like very 3D didn't work out very well. Take into account that this is one of the earliest emulation handhelds. Like I mentioned, it is from 2017. And a lot of you who are new to this hobby might think 2017 doesn't sound like that long ago. But it is important to note that all of these famous companies that are making handhelds today, their history doesn't go too far back. Like improved versions of this handheld, like the new RS-97, they were being sold under the name Anbernic. So a lot of people might think Anbernic was the ones who made this, but these old one was being sold by a lot of different companies, which makes me assume it was mass produced by someone else, and then a lot of the different companies were just buying it and rebranding as their own and reselling. I did buy this from Datafrog, I believe. There was a lot of Cool Baby at the time. Anbernic was one of them, and so on. But I assume Anbernic got the license for it because eventually they started selling these on their own site and improved versions of this that had the analog stick and whatnot. But even then, the RS-97 being sold in Anbernic, that was before their actual handhelds that Anbernic produced themselves, which started with the RG350, and that was their first Anbernic device that they produced themselves. But if you go see on their site, even now, you can see them selling the RS-97, though that one is the improved version, and the PAP K3, which also came before the RS-97. So yeah, Anbernic's history didn't really start until like 2018, 2019 and onwards. So this device being 2017, it is one of the earlier handhelds out there. Of course, definitely not the earliest. Like I showed you in this channel itself, there are quite a few that came before. All the Dingus came before. Dingu A320 was 2009, and a lot of people think that that one is the grandfather of emulation handhelds, but there were many that came before that one as well. The earliest one of these kinds of handhelds was probably the Game Park handheld from 2001. Those were definitely much older by comparison. But because handheld emulation was not so sought after before, was not so popular as they are today, we didn't see that much of an improvement from back then. From 2001 to 2009, there was practically no improvement in performance. If you had the Game Park handheld from 2001, it could play just as many things as the Dingu A320. Even though they had different chipset and everything, the performance was very similar. And then comparing the A320 that came out in 2009 to this, the RS-97 in 2017, that's like 8 years difference. Even then, you can see that yes, there was an improvement, but they were using very similar chipset. So though there was an improvement in RAM, 4 times the RAM, assume the performance improvement on this are all because of the RAM, but even the handheld themselves, they still use the mini USB and so on. So there wasn't a considerable improvement there regarding Linux handhelds. Of course, like I said, Android handhelds started coming out and they were getting better results, and then the GPT-Win came out, being one of the very first Windows-based gaming handheld to come out, and that one of course could do much better stuff, and things just started to improve from there. Now, things only started to really make a difference near 2020, 2021. Once Steam Deck came out, that definitely turned a lot of attention to the handheld scene. And so in these last 2 to 3 years, we saw a unimaginable huge improvement in the handhelds. But until then, a lot of them were largely the same. And then you see handhelds now being able to play PS2 and GameCube and stuff. It's things that we could have never imagined back even in 2017 when we were messing around with the RS-97. So yeah, pretty cool to see. And like I said, this compared to the handhelds we have today definitely falls short in performance, but it is definitely a cool handheld to have. I think it is cool to have it in our collection, not just only to play these games, but of course also to see as a part of the emulation handheld history and be reminded of how far we came in the emulation handheld scene. But yeah, and like I mentioned, this is all of the emulation handhelds that I have to show. This was the last one that I bought way back in 2017 before I quit my job. But making these videos have made me want to maybe get one of the more modern emulation handhelds, you know, to have to play on and perhaps make a video comparing to these older handhelds and see all that. But I'm not too sure when that will be, so stay tuned. And that's it. That's all I had to say and show. If you would like to see me run something specific on the RS-97, let me know. It is much easier to put things on the RS-97 than it is on the A320 at the moment, just because my version of Windows does not recognize those handhelds. Otherwise, leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider helping out the channel by clicking on the join down below. Subscribe to see more videos like this and of other in-game collection stuff. And of course, always nerd on.